I think yes, I'm still, I can see the yellow around my box. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. I will be with you for the next hour, and I will start sharing my screen right now. So I know it's a little bit jarring as soon as the screen shares, so forgive me for the quick transition. There we go. Can everyone see the title? It's Expanding Understanding in the LGBTQIA+ community. Yes? All right, thank you. Let me make sure that I see everyone. Wonderful. Well, I'm very happy to be here today, and I appreciate Wayne for reaching out and asking if we were able to have this presentation. I know we only have an hour, but I am the kind of person that tends to overpack. I pack for the week if I'm only even gone for the weekend. So I have a lot of information on these slides. I really do hope for us to get through all of them. And to give us some time to spare for questions. So if you do have any questions as I'm speaking, if you can put them in the chat, or perhaps you can send them to Wayne in the chat as well. I'll be happy to answer them as soon as we're done with the information, because sometimes some of the questions may be answered in the information that we're going to get into. So without further ado, I will go ahead and jump in. What we're going to do today is, and it's ambitious, but I have hope, is we're going to talk about terms. Just a quick update on some terms. We're going to talk about SOGI, and if you don't know what that is absolutely okay. We're going to define what that is and give examples of it. We're going to talk about the impact of language, and then finally, we're going to have a discussion on pronouns. Especially since that is something that I've actually been asked quite a bit about in different communities in regards to using pronouns and why the use of other pronouns and just a lot of general questions. So this is what I would like for us to be able to accomplish today. So the first thing that we will be talking about is terms. Most people are aware of the L, the G, and the B. And within that, we are using those as lesbian, gay, and bisexual. Most people know that, or they understand lesbian to be a woman who experiences sexual, romantic, or emotional attraction to other women. Gay, which is usually seen as men who experience sexual, romantic, emotional attraction to other men. But also gay can be used to describe lesbians if they so wish to. And bisexual, a person who acknowledges in themselves the potential to be attracted either romantically, emotionally, or sexually to people of more than one gender, not necessarily at the same time, in the same way, or in the same degree. And so most of us are very familiar with the L, the G, and the B within kind of the LGBTQIA+ acronym. What some folks need a little bit more understanding of are the things that happen after the L, the G, and the B. And that's what I'd like to spend a little bit more time on. When we're looking at moving beyond the L, the G, and the B, one of the first terms I'd like to talk about is the term queer. Now, understandably, the term queer, depending on your experience within the community, you might have a very strong reaction to the word queer. I unfortunately have had it yelled across the hill at me by people who are not very friendly. But we've seen that there has been a recapturing of this word, kind of a taking back of using this instead of a pejorative term, to use this as a form of empowerment and for people to self-identify as queer. During the time that I have gone through my coming out journey and through the better understanding of myself and my identity, I now identify as a queer woman of color. So when we talk about queer, queer is an umbrella term that refers to all LGBTQIA+ people, and it's also for non-binary folks. It's a term used by individuals who may see their sexual orientation or gender identity as fluid, meaning that it's not really in one space. It moves and it shifts like liquid. Another term that is being used more often now is the term pansexual. Pansexual refers to a person whose emotional, romantic, or physical attraction is to people inclusive of all genders. Now, pansexuality and bisexuality are different in the space that pansexuality includes all genders equally, whereas bisexuality can favor some genders over others, although that's not always the case. It's always important knowing within any of these terms, it is always best practice to let the person who identifies with these terms tell you what it means to them. So all of these are just general ideas, but definitely it's very important for the person who identifies with any of these identities to inform you how it resonates with them. Another term that is being used much more often is asexual. Asexual are individuals who generally don't experience sexual attraction to others of any gender. Some do experience romantic attraction, and asexuality differs from celibacy in that celibates have a sexual attraction, but they choose to abstain from sex, as opposed to someone who identifies as asexual who doesn't experience any sexual attraction. Another term that is definitely being used more now is gender nonconforming. And someone who identifies as gender nonconforming is an individual who doesn't really adhere to the traditional gender expectations for appearance and behavior of people of their assigned gender. And when we talk about assigned gender, I'm definitely going to get into that when we talk about SOGI, but the easiest way that I explain it to people is when you are born, the doctor looks at you and says, congratulations, you have. And if a baby is born with a penis, they will say, congratulations, you have a boy. If the baby is born with a vulva, they will say, congratulations, you have a girl. Wayne and I were having a discussion that sometimes children are born and they actually don't necessarily have genitalia that is distinguishable as either a penis or a vulva. And we'll get into that in just a little bit. So if you are gender nonconforming, then you don't adhere to what has been maybe traditionally taught to you as the expectations for your gender and how they should look and how they should act. Someone who is non-binary is someone who uses this umbrella term for someone who doesn't fit into traditional male or female gender categories. And part of this can include individuals who may identify as agender or not any gender whatsoever, bigender, meaning that they feel that they have characteristics of both genders, gender fluid, in which their gender may change or may shift, gender queer, which is within the non-binary and non-conforming space. And there are other genders. I was just talking to Wayne that, you know, folks in their late teens, early 20s, even coming into their early 30s are really teaching me a lot of new definitions and terms as well. Finally, gender fluid. This is a person who does not consistently adhere to one fixed gender and who may move among other genders. It's important to understand that when we talk about non-binary, we're talking about the fact that for a very, very long time, gender has been seen on this line, on this linear plane that starts in one end and it moves over to another end. And within that line, it is a binary with man on one end and woman on the other. And folks who identify as non-binary say, you know, I don't really necessarily adhere to that strict linear space of like man or woman. Maybe, you know, some people kind of fall within that line, but maybe I'm up here somewhere, or maybe I'm off to this side. I don't necessarily feel that I adhere to that space of that linear model of what is gender for me. And we're actually going to talk about the difference between gender as far as your identity and your sex assigned at birth. Another term that I usually discuss when we have just terms in general is transgender. And this is a term describing a person's gender identity does not match their assigned sex at birth. And when we speak about gender identity, we're talking about what a person feels their innermost gender is, not necessarily what their genitals may look like, but who they know their gender to be. And we'll discuss a little bit more when we talk about SOGI in regards to how identity doesn't always correspond to the genitals that we were born with. Another term that is being used much more often is cisgender. So cisgender are individuals who identify with a gender that was assigned to them at birth. So this is for people who are not transgender. And the word cisgender came into use because they wanted to be able to have a definition of someone who is transgender and a definition of someone who is not transgender. Because very often in certain groups, they would just say if you're either transgender or you're normal. And it isn't a space of moving into normalcy because all of these identities are normal. All of these identities occur naturally and normally in the human existence. So cisgender is the term that's used for someone who does identify with the sex, then with the gender that they were assigned at birth. So if you are born and the doctor says, congratulations, you have a girl. And as you grow up, you say, yes, girl fits me, fits how I feel, fits the way that I understand my identity. And as I'm growing up, girl has transitioned into feeling like woman, and woman feels like who I am. And it fits who I identify as more than man would. And so in that space, that person would identify as cisgender. This also comes from the root word of meaning on the same side. So saying that the gender identity and the gender assigned at birth have maintained on that same space, as opposed to transgender, who someone that was assigned a gender at birth is actually doesn't identify with their assigned sex at birth. Intersex is actually the discussion that Wayne and I were having as everyone was coming in. Intersex is the current term used to refer to people who are biologically in between the medically accepted definitions of either male and female. So this actually can be through a lot of different variations. It can be a hormone variation. There is Klinefelter syndrome, that is a naturally occurring genetic condition where you have two X's and a Y. There may be hormones, chromosome, either internal or external genitalia differences, or really a combination of any of these, as well as our primary or secondary sex characteristics. So our primary sex characteristics, when we're born and they see that we either have a vulva or a penis, that is a primary sex characteristic. As we go through puberty, that corresponds to the gonads that we have in our body, either testes or ovaries, we develop differently. And so the secondary sexual characteristics is what you would see develop in either someone who has ovaries during their puberty or someone who has testes during their puberty. And so these are the terms that are usually used the most when discussing gender identity. So I know this is a lot for the first 15 minutes. I will take a second before we get into the next space. Does anyone have any questions on these? And we're recording it, so definitely, Wayne, everyone can go back and look at it again. But does anyone have any thoughts or anything kind of jumping out at them right now? All righty. If so, please let us know. The next thing that I would like to discuss is something called SOGI. SOGI is a term that is used to, in combination, describe how we identify. So here we see a gingerbread shaped person, and within that we see a box that they're inside of, or a pan, depending how hungry you are. It might look like a gingerbread person on a pan, but we have a box around the gingerbread person. We have a brain, a heart, and a little, I couldn't find a fig leaf, so whatever this leaf is in regards to the genitals. Now, when we talk about SOGI, the acronym stands for sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. So our sexual orientation, our gender identity, and our gender expression, that combination of those factors really do kind of shape how we see ourselves and how the world sees us. And to go into a little bit more detail about what that looks like, I have the genderbread person. This, this genderbread person has these different domains. Like, for example, the first one with the brain is identity. So this is how you, in your head, experience and define your gender based on how much you either align or don't align with what you understand the options for gender to be. So in that space, saying, you know, I identify as a woman and my genitals when I was born were, I was assigned female at birth. So my identity and my sex, they align. Sex are the physical traits you're born with or develop. And as we spoke about before, that is what is considered sex characteristics. Another thing that we're looking at is attraction. So that's the heart of the genderbread person. And this is who you find yourself being drawn to or not drawn to. Either to some people in a romantic or sexual way, or in any kind of space where you feel drawn to them. There was a TV show called Glee that I'm not even sure how many years ago it's been off the air, but within then they actually had a character who came out as transgender. And the way that he was explaining it to the people that were trying to understand their identity, they said, you know, my gender identity is, my sexual orientation is who I'd like to go to bed with, but my gender identity is who I would like to go to bed as. And that was their way of kind of making that difference between what is my identity versus who I am attracted to. The last one that we haven't talked about is expression. Now that's the little line that is around our genderbread person. So this is how you present your gender through our actions, our clothing, our demeanor. And so this is how you are presenting yourself to the world. And I will ask for a little audience participation in this. If I asked you, what is traditionally seen as clothing for women? What do you think is traditionally seen as clothing for women?
Dresses.
A dress, dresses, yes. What else?
A bra.
A bra, yes. Horrible contraptions that they are, but absolutely. A bra.
More colorful.
Stockings, more colorful, yes. High heels.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're looking at things that are more traditionally for a woman, we see things like jewelry, the kind of jewelry, the size of the jewelry, the way that where you put the jewelry, even hair, depending on even if it's long or if it's short, what's the cut look like? How do we cut it? What are the things that we put on ourselves? Do we use perfume or cologne? And what is the difference? You know, why is one set to smell more masculine as opposed to maybe more flowery or more fruity? And so when we're looking at this, all of the things that we put together is part of that. So I'd like to ask a question, and feel free to either raise your hand or not. How many of you, when you woke up this morning, thought about your gender expression? And so my follow-up question, how many of you woke up this morning and put on clothing? Everyone. So every decision that's made in regards to clothing, in regards to if you paint your nails, if you don't paint your nails, if you wear high heels, if you don't wear high heels, all of these things are part of your expression. If you woke up and put on a sundress, that's part of your expression. If you woke up and put on slacks or some jeans and some work boots, that's part of your expression. And it's very important for us to understand that gender expression is very cultural in nature. So for example, how many of you know what a kilt is?
I do.
Well,
yes.
yeah.
If you had never seen a kilt, and you saw someone wearing it, what would you think?
Scottish.
Yeah.
If you had no idea of
Oh.
of who Scottish people were, you might think that they were wearing a skirt,
The skirt, yes.
Yeah.
but you wouldn't tell a Scotsman that they're wearing a skirt. That is a one-way road to an argument. I actually had a very good friend who went to prom in a kilt, which was the traditional tartan pattern of his family. Beautiful, beautiful kilt. But for them, it's a very masculine attire.
Mm.
And so when we talk about our expression, all of us were taught how to dress like a man, how to dress like a lady, how to act like a man, how to act like a lady. And for some of us, we thought, okay, this is okay. Some of us thought, nope, I hate this because this is not who I feel I am in here. Even though when I was born and they said girl, and they've been trying to teach me how to act like a lady, I've never felt girl, I've never felt lady, I've always felt boy, I've always felt man. And so maybe their expression is not matching their identity because they're forced to express themselves one way, but they know that deep down inside, they know that they may identify with something that doesn't necessarily show in their expression. And for some people, that may be a safety issue. For some people, if they put on a sundress in the morning and go walking outside, but they have hairy legs and a beard and short hair, they may be assaulted.
Mm.
Or if they're wearing makeup or painting their nails.
Mm.
So a lot of times we try to match our expression to our identity, but sometimes, especially for some people in the community, it's dangerous to do so because unfortunately the world is a scary place sometimes. So when we talk about Soji, we talk about all of these different things make who you are. So how you identify, whether that matches to the sex that you were assigned at birth, who you're attracted to, who makes your palms sweat and your knees weak, how you express yourself, the things that you look at and say, when I wear this, it feels good, it feels right. All of that in this combination make up who you are, just as much as it makes up who another person is. And it's important to understand that expression, it can tell you about what's happening, but it doesn't always. I use the example of saying, it's like deciding what you know is inside the Christmas present just by the wrapper.
Mm.
You would have to open that Christmas present and know what's inside there to make that decision. I used to give a lot of trainings to social work departments all across LA County. And a woman came up to me one day and she says, I think I get it. I think I understand this. And I said, tell me. And she said, I had a friend that I was working with who was a social worker, and I knew she was a lesbian. I knew it. She had short hair. She always wore like these manly boots, and she wore these jeans and this and that. She was just telling me how her friend at work was dressing and how they presented. And she said, and I was getting ready to tell her that I support her and I support her in her identity. And as she was getting, working herself up to be able to kind of, proclaim her support for her coworker actually ended up telling her that she and her husband were expecting a baby. And so when we're talking about don't make a decision on what's in the present by the wrapping paper, that was a perfect example. That woman was not a lesbian. She just preferred wearing the kinds of clothes that she liked to wear. So it's always important that it may be a clue or expression, but it's always better to get to know the person before we decide what the expression is telling us. This is the updated one. It's called the gender unicorn. I like the unicorn. I think it's cute, but it talks about the same concepts. It's a little more in detail because here it gives you this linear space of like female, woman, girl, man, male, boy, if they feel perhaps some other gender or a combination of it. I've actually used these in therapy where I would tell someone, okay, here is a pen, mark down on any of these where you think you fall. And it allows for a discussion in our therapy session. So this is the gender unicorn, the genderbread person. They all come from around the same place. And one is from it's called It's Metrosexual, and this one is the Trans Student Education Resource. within that, I wanted to check in about the difference between sex versus gender. When we're talking about gender, what most people understand as biological gender, it includes these attributes like external genitalia, the chromosomes. Are you an XX? Are you an XY? Gonads. And when we talk about gonads, all that means is if you have testes or if you have ovaries. The sex hormones. So in what level do we have either testosterone or estrogen in our system? All of us have both. It's just different levels. And depending on the levels, it's what triggers different changes in our bodies. What are the internal reproductive structures that we have? So at birth, this is used to assign sex. And that is for most folks, either identifying them as male or female, unless there is some ambiguous genitalia or extra chromosomes, or even the internal reproductive structure is different. And that is when that person may be identified as intersex, because they're kind of into this intersection of both what most people would identify as male or most people would identify as female. Gender, on the other hand, is a lot more complicated. It's this relationship between your gender biology. It's this relationship between your own sense of self as male or female, as both or neither, as a mix of everything, which in this is gender identity. And then the outward presentation and behaviors, which is our gender expression, that's really related to that perception, which includes our gender role. And in that space, that's when we talk about SOGI. An example that I tend to use is back when the world was still traveling, and lots of us don't travel as much as we used to, I would sometimes get a room where they would give you 2 twin beds instead of like a singular bed. And I would use the second bed as a closet. I would just put my clothes on that bed and sleep in the other. And I would tell people that if you walked into my room and saw the clothes on the bed, you probably thought a man was there. But the way I express my femininity is a little bit more, I say masculine of center. I feel my most me when I wear clothes that is more traditionally masculine. Do I think that I'm a man? No, I don't identify as a man. Do I want to be one? No, I don't want. I'm very, very happy with my gender and how I identify. And I know for me, wearing the clothes that I wear makes me feel closest to who I am. I would often joke that if you put me in high heels, it would be like a giraffe roller skating. It would not end well for me or anyone around me.
Mhm.
And knowing that, you know, the way that my biology, the way that I understand my gender and the way that I express myself, it is the truest form of who I am. And that's one of those spaces that we want to be able to allow everyone to have. Like, where is the truest space for you? So together, this intersection of all of these 3 dimensions produce a person's authentic self. It's their sense of gender, and it really is both in how people experience their own gender and really how others perceive it. So when we're looking at sex versus gender, there's so many different things that are kind of intersecting and connecting. Any questions on that? You all are a very captive audience and I appreciate it. But if you have any questions, please feel free to just toss them out. I think we're doing well with our time. Wayne, definitely let me know.
I do have a question.
Please.
And it's back to the first section, but I didn't
Okay.
ask it because you said some of these things will be covered, but it
Yes.
never was covered. And what is the AI, LGBTQIA?
IA. So it's lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, asexual. So we discussed the intersex and the A is the
Oh, okay. I wasn't paying that good attention, I guess.
That is absolutely okay.
Oh,
And then
yeah,
the Q is either seen as queer or for some people questioning because they
Yes.
feel like they're still growing into their identity.
Right, got it. And plus is everybody else.
And plus is the whole alphabet family.
Yeah, okay. Any other terms coming up?
Yeah, and the things that are still being discovered as we speak.
Right, got it.
When I came out and this was in the 90s, which I would say was not that long ago. My students weren't even born at the time would say, but you didn't use the word queer because you knew that if anyone said that around you, they were meaning to do you harm. And so these terms are expanding, and like the acronyms are expanding to be able to hold them all and saying, it's all of us together.
Right.
But thank you for asking. I appreciate the question. Does anyone else have any other questions on any other things that we talked about previously, either the terms or when we were discussing Soji? And if anyone has any thoughts, please feel free to jump in as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be a question.
Well, I just wanted to bring up again the sex assignment at birth, which happens more than people think it does. And every hospital has a policy on how to handle it. I don't think there's a universal policy.
Mm-hmm.
So when a baby is born that doesn't have clear sexual organs, it's really up to the doctors and the parents as to what gender is going to be assigned to that child.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a guessing game as to whether that child is going to agree by the time they get old enough to realize.
Absolutely. And Sophia, I see your hand.
I don't know if this question is appropriate at this time, but for some of the members that I work with and other folks, one thing I hear a lot is this idea that like pronouns are trendy. It's something that, only like younger people use. But, I've started to read more about and talk to and actually know older folks who, use different pronouns than you would assume that they use. So I just wanted to know if you could speak on, that idea of pronouns being like trendy and like a young person thing.
Absolutely. We have a whole section on pronouns that we're definitely going to discuss, because if one of the things that we have to be aware of is that language is continually evolving. And so when we understand that, when we're looking back, we're finding that people were using different identifiers for their gender throughout history, and understanding that, and I'll definitely get into that. It's really interesting because if someone might not be used to it, they will often have a reaction of, well, why are you doing this now? This wasn't done before. But in the truth of it is, a lot of these things were. Maybe they had different ideas of understanding, but things like pronoun, and we'll talk about they as a singular pronoun. If someone left their wallet on the table and you didn't know who left it there, you would say someone left their wallet. And you would not assign gender of the person who left their wallet because you don't know. And so you say, oh, they left their wallet on the table. I wonder where they went. And so when people say things like, oh, I don't think I could use they as a singular, that's a perfect example of using they as a singular.
Right.
Oh, someone left their water bottle, because most of us tend to carry water bottles we never drink. Oh, someone left their water bottle on the table. We should go get them. Do you know who this belongs to? And those are ways that we use language that, if we think about it, we've been using things like that all our lives. It's just sometimes there is a space of people feeling uncomfortable because they don't understand, but it's a lot different than, and I'll go into this, and this is part of the impact of language. There's a difference between unsafe and uncomfortable. Uncomfortable means that there is room for growth. There is room for you to learn. There's room for us to understand each other better. There's room for us to kind of expand our awareness. Unsafe is the space where we feel like there is a threat to ourself. either emotional harm, physical harm. And if it just takes us a little bit more time to get out of that feeling of uncomfortable, it'll actually make a lot more people feel safer. And that is just as caring human beings. I think that that should be the goal for all of us. If I learn what's making me uncomfortable about it, and oftentimes it's not the other person, it's our perceptions of what that might mean, and we learn to kind of move past that space of uncomfortable, then we might actually end up helping another person feel safer. And that is an amazing thing that each of us have the power to do. You know, using someone's pronouns can save their life. And it seems like and we're definitely, I definitely want to get into that space. And it seems like saying, well, how can that save their life? Well, if you feel you're not seen, and then one person sees you, then you understand this feeling of worthiness. And everyone is worth dignity. And that's kind of part of that process that we're through. So I will definitely get to talk a little bit more about it, but no, definitely a space that we'll talk about. We have the impact of language, and it's a smaller section, but I thought it would be important for us to kind of go over and discuss. The first one is expanding our vocabulary. Now, for a very long time, people use sexual preference or sexual choice or the word lifestyle when discussing orientation or identity. A preference is if I'm going to a wedding and they ask me, do I want the rubber chicken or do I want the dry steak? And I'll say, I'll have the rubber chicken, please. Because those are the two options that people tend to give you in weddings. And so that is my preference. That changes, you know, that isn't anything that I'm really attached to in that space. A lifestyle is, you know, those folks that go jogging every day. And I appreciate that about them. But when we're talking about orientation or identity, these are even fluid identities. These are things that people don't necessarily choose. The only thing that people choose is to whether tell you about it or not tell you, whether to be honest when asked or not to be honest. And there are millions of reasons why someone would not be honest. Going back to the space of maybe they feel unsafe because the way that they explain their identity might make someone uncomfortable. So we really are moving away from using sexual preference or sexual choice or even lifestyle, and really focusing on either sexual orientation or identity. We're also trying to move away from homosexual and using LGBT or even the more expansive LGBTQIA+. And the reason for that is kind of twofold. The first is that homosexual was listed and as a clinician, I work with the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It is the DSM. A lot of people call it like the Bible of mental health. And in the DSM, in DSM-2, homosexuality was listed as a mental disorder. And so in a lot of ways, that term has kind of remained in that stigma. And when we're talking about homosexuality in the past, it was most notably used when speaking about men. And in the understanding that within the community, within the LGBT community, the LGBTQI+ community, there is more than just pathology or what's seen as illness. And there's more than just the space for men. There's a space for others as well. So that's why there's been a shift from homosexual to even just using LGBT. Another thing that we're looking at with expanding vocabulary is understanding that you do not say transgendered with an ED or a transgender. You just say transgender. You don't need the ED or you don't need the A. And when people talk about a sex change, what they're really talking about is gender affirming surgery or gender confirmation surgery, because these changes are going to affirm or confirm their understanding and identity. So now that their body and their identity is aligned. It's important for us to understand that referring to someone as a transgender or as transgendered can make it sound as odd as someone saying, look, a gay. You know, it turns a descriptive adjective into a defining noun. And it makes the person sound foreign, it makes them sound distant, and it's like there's something else first and then a person second. Someone who is transgender is a person first, foremost, always. So they are not transgendered. That is not a condition that they are suffering, and they are not a transgender. And it's also important for understanding that they're not necessarily changing their sex, they're just affirming who they are. So pronouns, I'm going to go through this because I definitely want to be able to answer some questions, but this is definitely something that we're looking at. So let's get into pronouns. So what are pronouns? Pronouns are words you may like others use in place of your proper name. So some examples for pronouns are she and her, he and him. There is gender neutral pronouns that some people use, such as thee and here, or they and them. Some people use specific pronouns, any pronouns, or even none at all. I know people that say they will respond to any pronoun as long as it's said respectfully. Pronouns don't have a gender. Pronouns are simply replacements for nouns. And it's also important to remember that pronouns are not preferred. This implies that the pronoun usage is a preference or a choice, not a lived reality. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So here is just a little graphic of how pronouns may be grouped together, but understanding that they may be grouped in whatever way that the person feels most identified with. Either she, her, he, him, they, them. I know someone that identifies as they, she, or he, they. So this is just how a person identifies, and that is the pronouns that you should use. So why are we focusing on pronouns? Well, you may have noticed that people are sharing pronouns in a lot of introductions, on name tags, at the beginning of meetings. If you see my name, it says my name, but it also has in parentheses my pronouns. Now I speak Spanish, so my pronouns are she, her, and ella. Ella is she in Spanish. So when I speak of my pronouns, I say she, her, ella. This gives everyone in the room the opportunity to kind of self-identify instead of assuming someone's identity or which pronouns they use. I use my pronouns in this because I want everyone to know not only are these my pronouns, but I am leaving this open for you to identify yours as well. Including a pronoun is really the first step towards respecting someone's identity, creating a more welcome space, and really having a space for all genders. And going back to preferred to personal, words are really powerful tools for language. They really are. And it helps us convey meaning. It helps us connect to others. The way we use words really help us communicate, characterize, and describe everything around us. And there's nothing more personal than the words people use to refer to us through our names and our pronouns. Very often, people would say, what are your preferred pronouns? And now we're moving from either preferred pronouns to personal pronouns or just pronouns, because it's not a preference. Going back to talking about sexual orientation instead of sexual preference, it's not a preference. It is how I identify and who I identify as. So when we're talking about pronouns, we are trying to move away from that space of using the term preferred pronouns and either staying in the space of personal pronouns or just saying pronouns. So how is this more inclusive? Pronouns can sometimes be a signifier for someone's gender identity, but not always. We don't want to assume people's gender based on expression. And we really want to be able to provide an opportunity for people to share their pronouns. You're showing that you're not assuming their gender based on just their appearance. I have had people ask, well, what if I don't want to share my pronouns? Or what if I don't want to, go into that space? That's okay. Providing space and opportunity for people to share their pronouns doesn't mean that everyone feels comfortable or needs to share their pronouns. So just because I share my pronouns doesn't necessarily mean you need to share yours, but it does allow that space for you to see that if you would like to, you are more than welcome to. Some people may choose not to share their pronouns for a variety of reasons. In the case that someone has left pronouns like off of a name tag or off of like their Zoom, or they've chosen not to share, it's important to refrain from using pronouns for that person and to refer to the person by what's on their name tag. So for example, if you don't know someone's pronoun, instead of saying, oh, she left her wallet here, or he left their wallet there, or you can just say, Michael left. It looks like, that's Michael's wallet. Michael left Michael's wallet. Where did Michael go? Instead of saying, where did he go? Or, where did Ellen go? Instead of saying, where did she go? And so whenever someone says to me, I don't know, I don't want to offend someone, and I'm still kind of getting used to using pronouns, and I just say, just use their name. Instead of being in a space of like, I don't know and I don't want to offend, or it feels like a lot, which I understand if we're getting used to using different pronouns, it does. But I also tell people that it feels a lot also to be misgendered. And we'll talk about what that is right now. So misgendering is the experience of being labeled by others as a gender other than the one that the person identifies with. For example, I identify as she, her, ella. I have been called he quite a few times. I do have short hair, but when I was in my 20s, I had very long hair. It's very thick. And I said, I'm going to donate it. So I shaved my head and had a very crisp winter. I shaved my head and I donated all of my hair to Locks of Love, which is a place that makes wigs for children with cancer. And I've always dressed a little more masculine, and I would experience sir a lot. And for me, it doesn't bother me as much. It's not the end of the world, but I can imagine someone who every time someone misgenders them, it's like another stab. It's another hit. It's another blow to, you don't see me. You're not, open to see me. You've already decided who I am based on what you think you see, and that is what you're going with, instead of asking, instead of allowing that space. So because not all people, or because many or not all associate their pronouns with their gender identity, using the wrong pronoun intentionally or unintentionally is a form of misgendering. Whether intentional or not, using the wrong pronoun can be hurtful, it can be angering to the person, it can be distracting, and some might find it equivalent to being told that they don't matter or deserve respect. Invalidating someone's identity puts a strain on how a person moves in society and how the individuals interact with others. I had a friend that I used to work with a few years back who was a transgender woman. And she would always dress very feminine, heels, skirt, just very much into what you would imagine as traditionally feminine clothing. Long hair, makeup, nails, the whole bit. And I remember one day there was a Subway next to our office, and I went into the Subway and she was getting her food. But as she was getting her food, the person that was making her sandwich kept saying, "Sir, do you want anything else? Sir, can I help you? Sir, what?" And here is a person who is very obviously conveying, that space of gender. And she even said she, but that person insisted on just saying sir. And every time that he said sir, it was so pointed and so mean, in a space of almost like, I am doing this on purpose. I am misgendering you on purpose. And that can feel violent and aggressive to someone, especially since other people who may not understand and who don't like being uncomfortable may make that situation unsafe for her. So it's very important to understand that we try not to misgender someone. But sometimes we make mistakes, and everyone makes mistakes. Just please take accountability for your mistake and continue using the correct pronoun. The important thing is to be mindful of is not to unload your guilty feelings on either the transgender, non-binary, or gender non-conforming person, or expect forgiveness. They might have a strong reaction to the misuse of their pronouns, and they may need a space to recenter themselves. Because for you, it might have been one time and you're very sorry, but for them, it might have been the 50th time today that people are doing that to them. And they're very much trying to just maintain their space of dignity. So what are some tips for gender neutral language? Practice, 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 practice. That is the biggest tip I can give you. Use gender neutral pronouns such as they or z, but while visualizing the person who uses them. I had a friend who I had grown up with, and they were using a different gender, a different pronoun. And then they came out and they told me I'm now using this pronoun. So whenever I would go see them, I would be in the car and thinking about them and their pronoun, because I really didn't want to make the mistake. So this is really useful to do right before you're about to see the person. So I would be driving in my car and doing this, like, okay, remember, remember, remember. When addressing a group of people whose pronouns you haven't been told, it's important to use like gender neutral language, like siblings, like students, friends, folks. I say folks quite a bit because I don't say, hey guys, but I tend to use folks as more of a gender neutral space. And it's really fascinating because as we're moving forward and continuing moving at a blinding speed into the future, more and more individuals are finding the language and support to identify as something other than their assigned sex at birth. So for example, there was a recent study that said that millennials are more than twice as likely to identify as LGBTQ at a rate of 20% than previous generations. And 56% of Generation Z respondents, which is the most diverse generation in the US, know someone who uses gender neutral pronouns, which is really a significant increase from previous generations. These are my references, just so you know I didn't make anything up. And I am actually going to stop sharing so I get an opportunity to look at all of you in case you may have any questions. So thank you for allowing me some time to have this discussion with you. I really do appreciate it. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
I have a lot of questions.
Yes.
I'm more confused now than I was when we started.
Okay. Okay.
Well, you weren't really talking about pronouns. You were talking about other terms. I mean, when you talk about addressing people and so forth, you know, guy, or you were talking about like guy or sir or whatever. Those aren't pronouns.
They aren't pronouns, but they also imply a male pronoun space. So you use a guy when you're talking to a man. You use sir when you're talking to a man. And usually men are use he and him pronouns. And so if you have someone that doesn't identify as a man and you use sir with them, you're actually misgendering them and not being correct in the way that they identify.
Yeah, but as regards to pronoun, a pronoun is something you use when you talk about somebody you don't know who it is.
Yes. And so I'm sorry, go ahead.
You don't address people with that.
And so I think all of this is interconnected. The idea of understanding someone's pronouns, how they identify, whether they identify as she, as he, as they, all of that influences also how you use other terms with them. So if you know that person's pronoun, like if you know that person identifies with she and her pronouns, then you know that they would also more than likely identify if you say ma'am. And so understanding their pronouns and understanding how their identity in that space actually helps guide you in using other terms for them in other spaces as well. And so it all comes from that place of understanding how they identify within their pronoun.
Okay, you said that the choice of that, what pronouns people like to use is a personal choice.
Yes.
And it isn't directly related to what their sex is or whatever. It's what they choose to use. And even your pictures supported that definition. But if I'm using somebody else's pronouns, do I have my choice to use the ones that or if they haven't expressed their choice to me, I mean, I don't even use their pronouns. I use their name or sir, you know.
And using their name is a perfect example of the way to do that. You could absolutely use their name. I think using their name is one of the best ways to, if you don't know their pronouns, or if you don't want to offend someone by using the wrong pronouns, using their name is an excellent way to
They
be
aren't
able
gonna
to have
know I
that.
used the wrong pronoun because they're not gonna be around when I talk about them.
And so I think part of that space also is, even if they're not around, if you identify with she and her, and as a woman, knowing, even if you never know that someone is calling you he, him, or a man, it's still hurtful to do that, because you don't sit in that space of respect for that person. So it doesn't matter if they're not here. It doesn't matter if you're not talking to them directly. It's just knowing, this is how I identify, and these are the words and the terminology that I will use whenever I speak about them, because that is what they would like if they were in front of me, or even if they're not in front of me. And I saw Karen. Yes, I see it. Excuse me, Dory.
I'm listening to this conversation, and I wanted to share with Dory a situation. I was in an art show, and the person in the booth next to me, I don't remember what the issue was, but somebody came up to me and said, "Where did you get that?" And I said, "Oh, he got it for me." Well, he was transitioning and resented being called he, and was most indignant with me. And I remember feeling terrible because I never meant to hurt his feelings. And I was very apologetic. And he heard me. So there are situations where people can hear you. And my immediate response, because I have a weird name, it looks like Karen, but it's Karen. So I'm a little sensitive. I mean, I understand that to some degree. And I felt genuinely bad about it. Well, it all worked out because we ended up being stuck with each other, through the whole art show, and we worked it out. But it is, I imagine, very hurtful. And
It is.
and I would never have known it except that he pointed it out to me.
Was his,
Does
well, I just don't know. There's so many situations in which, I mean, what is the relevance of it? You're saying it has to do with identity, but what is the relevance of that? I mean, if you like, suppose you're a doctor, I am a doctor. People, or I used to be, before I retired, people always thought I was a man, but not because they looked at me, but they were surprised. Oh, the doctor's a lady, But
and I think with the relevance in that, and I see your hand, Nancy, and I know that we're over time, so I want to give you an opportunity to ask your question or comment as well. I think the relevance is understanding that everyone has their own identity, and to be able to acknowledge others' identity, even if it might not make sense to us for whatever reason, it is a space of being able to be not only understanding that, okay, this is how someone else identifies, but it's also a space of respect for them. And so I am also a doctor. And do people assume gender when they see doctor? Sometimes yes. But and even if after they saw me, if they still were saying I'm a man, that would bother me because I'm not. And so it all comes to a space of respect and saying, I may not exactly understand how it's relevant in our discussion, or I don't understand why someone would identify in this way or that way, but I will still respect you in that space of referring to you as you would like to be referred, because that is how you identify. And I think that even working through those spaces of not understanding is okay. It's just at the end of the day is I respect this is how you identify, and I will use that, even if I may take some time to understand it. And Nancy, yes, I apologize. I know it's 4:05 right now, but
you have made what I'm beginning to understand, Eugenia, and you and Karen and Dory have made this point this is something, this is a learning process for us. And yes,
Yes.
we will make mistakes, but it's an opportunity to learn. And that's a gift.
Mm.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
It was excellent. It was an excellent
Thank you,
presentation.
Karen.
Thank you very
I'm less
much.
confused than I was before.
I do have to mention that it brought up, it reminded me when I was working with some of my Filipino coworkers at the hospital, and we would be talking about a mutual patient, and they would refer to the patient by a pronoun that seemed to be the opposite of how I identified the patient. And I would sometimes have to stop and ask them if we were talking about the same patient, because I was talking about an 82-year-old woman and they were referring to the patient as a he. But that was a language thing.
Oh, yeah.
That's true. Yeah.
And it wasn't a preference thing on the part of the patient.
It wasn't
But-
an insult. It was not an insult.
No, it wasn't.
No.
No.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to sit and listen. Wayne knows how to get a hold of me. So if, in the future, you'd like for me to come back and talk about this a little more, I'm more than happy to.
Thank you
So-
so
Thank you
much.
very much.
Thanks a
Thank
lot.
Thank you
you.
very much,
Very good.
Eugenia.
You're
Thanks,
very
Wayne.
welcome. Thank you.
And thank everybody for their attention and their comments and questions.
Yes, thank you, Wayne.
Thank you, Wayne.
Whoever put
Goodbye,
this on,
everyone.
thank you
Bye.
Bye.
for arranging it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.